Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Lessons from the Pandemic, Weaknesses in K-12 Teacher Education Policies, Fuel Inequities Facing English Learners. Before we begin, we have just a couple housekeeping notes. If you have any problems, please contact us by email at events@migrationpolicy.org or call 202-266-1929. You can use the Q&A chat function on the right of the screen throughout the webinar. We do encourage you to ask questions anytime during the presentations, and we'll get to those questions towards the end of the webinar. You can also send an email to events@migrationpolicy.org with your question, or tweet to @migrationpolicy or #MPIDiscuss. And we wanted to let you know that the slides and audio from today's webinar will be available after the event at migrationpolicy.org/events. So for those who are not familiar with us, the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy at MPI works on a number of areas, primarily in education and training, but also in other areas like language access and governance of integration policy. Like so many, we have shifted a lot of our work at this point to looking at what's happening with English learners during the pandemic. A few weeks ago, we had a series, the first in our series of webinars on COVID and ELs, and we discussed what's happening at the state and district level to help meet the needs of English learners in remote learning. And around that time, we also released a policy brief on the challenges English learners and their families have faced and some recommendations for policy, which you can access on our website. You see the URL there. And we also have a commentary from earlier in the year on the role community-based organizations have played in the role of in the response to the pandemic. Today we have three amazing panelists with us. We're going to dig a little bit deeper by talking about teachers and their professional learning. Our webinar today is a little bit different format than what we typically do. I'll be moderating a panel and asking questions to our panelists, and then at the end we'll have time for your questions, but as I mentioned, please do add them to ask your questions in the Q&A panel as we go along. So I'm going to introduce the three panelists really briefly, but you have all our full bios in these slides, which you'll be able to access after the event. Our first panelist, Dr. Laura Baecher, is a professor of TESOL at Hunter College in New York City, and she has deep knowledge of our topic today as a teacher educator herself and through her research. She's currently the president of the New York State TESOL Association and has written numerous books and articles on teacher preparation to serve English learners. Roberto Rodríguez is the president and CEO of Teach Plus, which is an organization focused on teacher leadership to advance equity in K-12 education. Before Teach Plus, he was Deputy Assistant for Education in the Obama White House, and before that, an education policy advisor to the late Senator Edward Kennedy. And we also have Dr. Diane Staehr, who's the president of Support Ed, a small business that provides professional development and technical assistance on English learner education to a wide variety of clients. She's a prolific writer and frequent speaker on effective teaching practices and began her education career as an ESL teacher in Fairfax, Virginia public schools here in the DC area. So we are just thrilled and honored to have all of you with us today. I think this is the start of a really important conversation about policy solutions to the issues that were caused by or even just brought to light by the pandemic. Lots of folks have heard about how difficult schooling has been for English learner students, whether because of a lack of access to digital devices or other stresses due to coping with the pandemic. But there's been less attention paid to the experiences of teachers during this time, and also on how education policies and practices of the last decades have led us, to some extent, to where we are today. So I want to start with that historical context and ask each of our panelists some questions about where we stood with English learner education and teacher education policies prior to COVID. So, Laura, I'd like to start with you. For our participants who aren't familiar with teacher education, can you give us a brief overview of certification requirements to teach English learners for both English learner specialists and for general education teachers?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. So in terms of teacher preparation, pre-pandemic and continuing through now, As you can imagine, across the United States, there's a lot of variation in how teachers are certified to teach in public schools to serve pre-K through 12th grade English language learners. In about 10 states, it's actually a standalone certification area, just like becoming an English teacher or a math teacher, you become an ESL teacher. In a lot of the other states, it's simply an add-on. It's a set of courses, maybe 3 courses, maybe 5, and it's called an extension or an endorsement, and you already have a prior certification and you add on to it. Another thing that's, I think, important is that only a few states require a master's degree for permanent teacher licensure. New York State is one of them. So a lot of teachers around the country are getting bachelor's degrees in education. If they are getting that endorsement, it might even just be an exam. It's not even a full set of courses. And across the nation, there's been a real issue around making sure that all teachers get coursework in teaching English language learners. Believe it or not, even though, for example, in New York State, we have such a high population of English learners in the school, we don't have a required course on English language learners as part of teacher certification. Same applies for school leaders. There's no required course for school leaders on English language learners, which seems kind of shocking. Now, some states like Florida and California have built it in, but it's still it's a major issue, I think, across teacher ed in terms of really preparing teachers well to serve that population.
And thank you. And continuing on sort of through the continuum of where, what teachers do, Diane, once teachers are certified and in the classroom, how do states handle recertification or continuing education? And to what degree do teachers get ongoing professional development on English learners?
Right. It's very similar to what Laura described at the pre-certification level. So once teachers are in the classroom, unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of state requirements related to professional development required on English learners for recertification. My group at Support Ed, we just did a study and we only found that 4 states have some kind of state policy in place requiring professional development or coursework on English learners for recertification purposes. And in general, recertification happens once about every 5 years and with some type of professional development or coursework requirements. But we found that the vast majority of states, it's just not a priority for teachers, even knowing that across the nation, English learners are about 10% of the K-12 population.
Wow, that's kind of amazing. You know, these are the students are in every state, in every in so many districts, and yet there is not a lot of state guidance or state requirements. The other issue, as I was preparing for this, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is what we've been hearing about teachers retiring or deciding not to continue teaching because of the pandemic. And so that's something that's really been on my mind a lot. And Roberto, I wanted to ask you about this issue. Folks have been talking for a long time about the teacher shortage and the lack of racial and cultural diversity in the teacher pipeline. What can you tell us about these trends and how they've affected English learners and other traditionally underserved students?
Sure, Julie, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm delighted to be here with Diane and with Laura and this conversation. You know, it's important to acknowledge the state of our teaching profession at large as we're thinking about some of the challenges we're talking about today. And some of the barriers in front of us relative to recruitment, to teacher turnover, to teacher shortage, and also to the gaps that we've already started talking about in preparation, both in-service and pre-service preparation. So, you know, the enrollment in our teacher preparation programs since 2010 has declined. We have more than a third fewer teacher candidates in our pipeline than we used to have. And a lot of our state leaders and district level leaders are struggling with persistent year-to-year teacher shortages across the country in high demand fields. That includes in fields to support our emergent bilingual students and our English learners alongside STEM and special education and others. And then we have a broader public perception challenge. For the first time in 2018, a majority of parents have said they don't want their kids to seek a profession or a career in teaching because of low salaries and challenges in the working conditions, a lack of opportunity for career advancement and career pathways. So, there's a wage penalty that still is faced by so many of our teachers relative to other careers. Our teachers earn on average 78 cents on every dollar compared to other careers. And we have a turnover rate still that is really a challenge, and that is exacerbated when we look at our teachers of color in our system. We studied this at Teach Plus and found that so many of our African American and Latino teachers in our system are reporting feeling undervalued or having opportunities for agency and autonomy and advancement and leadership, and bear a higher cost than some of their other peers. So, those challenges, I think, really are compounded when we think about our teachers in our English learner classrooms. And as has been referenced, we have far greater number of our classrooms with English learners than we did before. That population has grown dramatically since the 1990s. To over 5 million today in many of our classrooms. And so we have some of these gaps both in pre-service and in-service in terms of being able to provide adequate skills and support to our teachers to meet the needs of our English learners and our emergent bilinguals.
So several of you have sort of alluded to this, but I wanted to ask everyone a question to sort of bring these challenges of teacher education into what we see actually in classrooms. So Laura, I'm going to start again with you on this round, but I want to pose this question to everybody. What have you seen as the main challenges in teacher education and professional development over the last few years, and how do those challenges connect with what's happening in classrooms?
Well, we could talk for a long time about that, but just to kind of continue, I think what Roberto brought up, I obviously serve New York City schools, which is the largest public school system in the world. It's 5 times the size of LA public schools, for example. This is a vast system. So in that system, you have such a huge, huge range. Even in the same building, you have completely different working environments. So even though you might be serving the same types of students, have the same kind of resources, the same salary, I think what I've read in terms of the research on teacher retention, it really has to do with the school culture and the school environment. And when teachers feel marginalized, and unfortunately, teachers of English learners tend to, by association, be on the margins. They are pushing in or pulling out or trying to collaborate, and they're not seen with the same regard as a science teacher or the math teacher. They're seen as sort of a glorified paraprofessional, even though they might have a master's degree in applied linguistics. So it's a real, again, as Roberto said, a perception problem that continues when you are serving emergent bilinguals to kind of get that sense of efficacy and to be recognized for your professional knowledge.
Right. Diane, what would you add to that?
See? We skip?
Yes, I will go to Roberto, and then we will come right back to you.
Sure. I think that we need to think about opportunities for reshaping our teacher preparation, even before our teachers reach the classroom, as well as greater opportunities for professional learning and for advancement in leadership for our teachers in the classroom, right? So on that first point, we need more deeper and more diverse preparation that's customized to where our teachers will teach. We know that the majority of our teachers teach in hyper-local markets, they choose to teach within 15 miles of their hometown. And so that's an opportunity for us to think about how do we more deeply provide clinical practice experiences that expose our teachers early to the coursework, the mentorship, the support that they need to be successful early in the profession, because we know that the majority of our teachers that do leave the profession leave within the first 5 years. So there's some really promising models around thinking about residencies, investments in grow your own programs. I know in New York there's a teacher residency program that prepares some teachers of color with a great level of depth relative to getting ready for success in the classroom. And we know that those programs pay off, right? Those programs show that 80 to 90% of our teachers prepared through those types of residencies stay in the classroom, and even 80% after 5 years stay in the classroom. I also think we need more opportunities for career pathways and for opportunities for our paraprofessionals working with our English learners to enter the teaching profession and to become licensed and certified. And here it's important to point out that we used to have at the federal level a depth of investment that had the context of a civil rights law with the Bilingual Education Act. We were, prior to 2001, about 20 years ago, investing $72 million a year in pre-service programs and career ladders for paraprofessionals to enter the profession. We were also dedicating support for our teachers in the teaching profession to learn more about how to meet the second language needs of students and more deeply preparing them with that pedagogy and that expertise across 700 projects across the country, $162 million that was invested in that. So our federal policy framework has moved and shifted to a block grant, and we've actually left behind some of these changes and shifts in pre-service and in in-service that we need to better equip our teachers for success.
Right, and I'm sure that plays out, Diane, in the professional development world that you're in. What have you seen in terms of the challenges and how that's played out in classrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. And my apologies for needing to skip back. Thanks, Roberto, for taking over. So there's so many issues, and many that Laura and Roberto brought up. But some of the biggest issues I see in the in-service professional development side is that any kind of PD that takes place is usually not sustained. It's kind of like a one-shot drive-by. It had been previously, although I know we'll be speaking about what's been happening nowadays. But I'm seeing now some promise in that the professional development that we've been doing at least is more sustained. There's more kind of buy-in with administrators and more collaboration because we're doing this virtually. It takes so much more effort now to provide high quality professional development, and we're really getting a lot of the more sustained PD with the collaborative piece. Also, just some issues in the past we've seen are that often administrators are not always kind of on board and having the PD that, sometimes we'll be working and the administrators have so much to take care of, right? So they're putting out fires, they're leaving the room to go take a phone call, they're, working on just so many things at the same time. And we also see a lot of initiative fatigue within the buildings, within school districts, when there are so many things going on. How do English learners fit into that? Is that just kind of an afterthought, or is it an integral part of the conversation? And so with all of these things happening, it can be super challenging. And also bringing in the piece about paraprofessionals, it's so important to provide not only paraprofessionals, as you mentioned, Roberto, the career ladders to get to the classroom, but also for those who are in that role as paraprofessional to provide schools and teachers guidance on how do we utilize their expertise in a sound way, because they do come with so many talents and just so much promise to be able to provide emergent bilinguals and multilingual learners, but how can we best utilize what they do bring?
Right. I want to move now into sort of this present moment of the pandemic and ask you to share a little bit about what you've heard from folks on the ground. What are some of the professional challenges that teachers of English learners are experiencing teaching remotely or in socially distanced settings? And Diane, if you don't mind, we'll start with you on that one.
Sure. I can start off with, there's so many issues right now. A lot of the, lack of time trying to find the students and to help them log on, just like dealing with the technology, getting the technology out to students. ESL teachers are functioning in many ways as social workers, making those kind of porch visits, helping kids get set up. The advocacy is just going through the roof right now, and being able to connect with families and with students to try to motivate kids who are not always, don't learn best in an online environment right now, and to make those personal connections when you might not have had a face-to-face relationship with your students, and you're the one connecting with them. Also, just the aspect of having English learners or emergent bilinguals use oral language. It's such a struggle now. How do we get them talking? How do teachers learn new strategies to do that? And also teachers have to learn so much new technology now to be able to make all of this work. And many times, so much of our teacher workforce is female. So we've heard also during the pandemic that many times it's, women who have their own kids at home, as, many of us do. How do you help your own kids who are in a virtual learning environment while you're supposed to be teaching at the same time and reaching out to families and connecting? So, and many times, in general, people who tend to be leaving the workforce are more women right now. And I'm just wondering how that's going to play out, as we mentioned earlier, with the teacher shortage and early retirements and furloughs and leaves of absence.
Right. Yeah, this is all of these things coming together. Roberto, I want to ask you the same question, and then Laura will go to you as well about the challenges that we're seeing right now.
Sure, Julie. Well, I think the first thing to point out is the obvious, which is that this pandemic has laid bare and exacerbated a lot of the inequities that our students and educators working in our high poverty and high need schools have already been facing, right, and wrestling with, whether those are looking at connectivity and digital equity, access to internet and access to continuity of learning, whether that's thinking about the financial health of those schools and or lack thereof relative to resources, and so at the same time, I think our educators working with our emergent bilinguals and their families, I have seen have just gone above and beyond. They have been tremendous, tenacious advocates and leaders because they understand their kids and their families and understand some of the policy challenges and economic and health challenges that are corollaries to the educational challenges here, right? If our students are in families that are being disrupted economically or are food insecure, that's going to impact their ability to show up, to be able to engage, to be able to progress in their learning. So I've seen a lot of our educators just go above and beyond in reaching out and doubling down, as Diane says, on the relationships, right, and the connections with parents in this moment. I think that's actually been a big silver lining in this pandemic, is that I think our teachers are able to see and connect with parents and with family members in real ways. Certainly some of the challenges around oral proficiency we've encountered with some teachers, but we've also seen some really interesting solutions. Our teachers moving to encourage their students to use Flipgrid and other ways to connect with them to be able to capture their progression in oral proficiency. And then our teachers just really showing up to provide technology, ensure that students have access to that as an opportunity for continuity of learning. And, so that's been really important. And I think teachers being the voice with other decision makers, with principals and with district leaders, to encourage students to be able to keep their assigned hardware at home, or, for our teachers, some of our teachers who work and teach on the border where our students are crossing, on a daily basis, to be able to give them the access to be able to take that technology back home and stay connected. I just think that level of connectivity and that relationship between our educators, our students, and between our educators and their families of our students is just so important in this moment we're in.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought up those positive thoughts about the when we get into these conversations, it can tend to get into the challenges, and we stay in the mode of the things that we're worried about. So I'm just so glad that you brought that up. Laura, I wanted to pose a question to you too about what you've been seeing with the challenges or maybe some of the good things that teachers and English learners are experiencing right now.
Well, I'm going to try to focus on the positive then, I guess. I think overall what I would say is that everything that was true pre-pandemic is just intensified now. Teachers of English learners tend to work in high poverty schools. They tend to be in urban centers. And there is, again, tremendous variation of what an English learner, a student, is going to experience in an affluent suburban district versus an under-resourced urban district. And I think those stressors are just more obvious now. So, for example, kids, like Roberto said, who are living in immigrant communities who are disproportionately affected by COVID are now also in schools that aren't open, that are having schedules where teachers, more than half of the teachers aren't in the building either. So they're in and they're out of the building, and things like ESL services, which already got canceled for almost any reason, are now really getting canceled. And the truth is, it's been almost 7 months for students that have not had any language support or direct English language development or native language instruction. So that is, I think, creating, again, we always have a real differential between kids who have access to literacy programs, enrichment programs in the summer versus a lot of our English learners. And now you just extend that. And this school year is very, very rocky. Like Diane mentioned, we have students who don't have the internet, have one device for 5 kids in the family. And to be honest, a Chromebook is not the best quality device, So it's really a challenge to get on and engage. How is that really happening? So there's a lot of missing students, as Diane said. And the teachers also are under tremendous stress. Now, yes, what they've always done, they're doing even more so. Like Roberto said, the advocacy, the connecting to the families, the trying to find, new ways to do things. And what I've seen is just an incredible blossoming using social media of teacher-to-teacher support. So for a lot of English language teachers, ESL teachers, dual language, bilingual teachers, they might be the only one in their building. They don't necessarily have a large community of, 10 other 5th grade teachers. They might be the only one. They might be itinerant. So using social media, I've just seen a tremendous growth in groups, specifically born out of this pandemic. The same is true in higher ed. For those of us who prepare teachers, there's so much activity in terms of how do we help create the kinds of learning experiences for teachers that will support them, because we ourselves, we're not teaching remotely in our careers as teachers. So now we're here trying to help and support the teachers. The teachers are the leaders now. We have to really celebrate and acknowledge teacher leadership and it's just so clear that they are the ones who are leading the rest of us, the building leaders, the administrators, the supervisors, everyone else. So I think that's been a very rich place to see how teachers are really rising to the challenges.
That is an excellent segue into a question that I had for Roberto, because one of the challenges for EL specialists is that they don't just provide direct services, as Laura just said, but they also provide expertise to other teachers in their building or in their district or in their state. What policies and practices can school leaders put in place to help EL specialists carry out their role as teacher leaders and mentors, both now while we're in remote instruction and then going forward?
Sure. Well, I think, we are, as has been pointed out, we're just in unprecedented territory this year, and things are upside down relative to opportunity and what is the normal of this school year. So, I think what we've been really focused on, and we just completed a study, Barriers to Bridges, that looked at some of the challenges and insights that our teachers are lending through this pandemic, elevating the expertise of our teachers and creating the space for that expertise to live and have currency and value in the decision making that our principal, our building leaders make, as well as that our district system leaders make, is really paramount in the moment. So it's thinking about as we're crafting plans for reentry and for continuity of learning, plans for health and safety for our educators or for students, plans for social and emotional learning and for meeting the needs, the wellness needs of our students and of our education workforce, that we create the space for our teachers' voices and expertise to be captured and to be reflected in those decisions, right? So I've seen a lot of leaders that have been making space to hear from the community, and a lot of leaders that have been really working to try to develop plans for reentry in the moment, as schools came back into session and some of them came back in person. But I think throughout the arc of this year, we need to see more of an opportunity for distributed leadership in our schools. And that means really working in developing the skill set and the attributes and orientation of our principals to create space for our teacher leaders to connect and to thrive. That means making sure we're, for instance, creating opportunities for collaboration, for active collaboration throughout the school week. I've seen a lot of systems that are starting to move toward a day that's set aside while they're working to try to create concurrent continuous learning plans and blended learning plans for students, setting aside a day for teachers to collaborate and come together to work vertically and horizontally in the school. That's really very important. As you mentioned, Julie, making sure that if our teachers don't have the opportunity to be together day to day in the building with those individuals that have that expertise around supporting our English learners and our emergent bilinguals, how do we create the space virtually for those individuals to really lend their expertise to the rest of their peers? It's going to take that level of collaboration, peer-to-peer collaboration this year, and some non-traditional scheduling, and some calibration around our expectations. Right, I think that's the other important thing as we look at practice, is that scope and sequence this year doesn't look the way it does normally. And so we have to provide the flexibility and the grace and the support for all of our educators to be able to course adjust there, and we need to provide some trust and some support for them in that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important point, that teachers are not necessarily getting great guidance from districts or from states in terms of, I've seen teachers pose, as Laura said, people are using social media, which I get to eavesdrop on, and I've been hearing people ask, we don't really have, some folks call them power standards, or, what are, with the huge number of standards that we have, what do I really need to focus on? And I think that's always been a little bit difficult for teachers, and I think there's a special level of concern that teachers are really not sure what those specific standards are, or I think what the key activities are that they should be having kids doing that they really want to make sure they don't miss. So it's really, again, very thankful for the level of sharing that we have seen in terms of using online for Twitter, Facebook, all of those things. And Diane, I want to ask you, how have schools and districts shifted gears in both the content and the format of their professional development? And I'm sure this issue of work will come up in your answer. And what are some of the best practices that you've seen in the last 6 months?
Sure. Yeah, obviously in terms of the format, right? No more, we're not seeing anyone, and I miss it so much. I miss working with teachers face to face and doing that ongoing professional development and professional learning. But, you know, we all shut down kind of mid-March, right, to some degree or other. So in terms of, you know, the content, we are, you know, akin to the power standards. We're looking at what's the most essential that we need to look at right now to support our English learners and emergent bilinguals. And, you know, in terms of best practices, we're working now so closely with district administrators, with organizational administrators to determine that. And we're always suggesting, you know, reach out to your teachers, ask them, what do they need? You know, and they'll tell you. And it's really opened up a lot of more kind of two-way conversations that weren't necessarily happening before. And it's always been, I've been trying to just constantly pause and reflect, you know, what's the positive that can come out of all of this, right? Moving forward, what can we take with us? And that's certainly one thing that I've seen as this level of collaboration and elevating the role, as you've mentioned, of the ESL teacher through this. And some of the best practices, just one that kind of strikes me off the top is right after shutdown, a district in Iowa, for example, reached out to us, and we did an online book study with all of their teachers, not just their ESL teachers, with about 500 content teachers across the district. We did an online study about culturally relevant teaching. They were all talking about the same thing. And it was just so powerful that, you know, during this time of turmoil, we could all be having these similar conversations around supporting English learners and multilingual learners and recognizing their strengths first and foremost before talking about meeting their needs. So, and within the practice of that, elevating the role of the ESL teacher to be helpful and instrumental in facilitating these conversations. So that's been just a lot of this has opened up people's creativity, really, that I've seen, and it's been amazing, honestly. We're talking about leadership and advocacy in certain school districts. In areas like in the Midwest, and not in your big states like California or New York, but other states that have these populations that haven't always been served. And these voices, these leadership voices really are rising up. And people, in my opinion, are listening to English learner specialists even more throughout this because they're boots on the ground. They're working with the kids and the families and doing this phenomenal advocacy for them. So I do feel like their voices are definitely getting heard. We're working with some districts now in ongoing projects where we're doing coaching and observations, but in virtual settings, right? So it's been amazing to just be kind of eavesdropping in a way and seeing what's happening and offering services in terms of curriculum and scaffolding and working with content teachers who really want to help. And many of these teachers are seeing that supports we're giving English learners are also helping students who need a little extra support in a virtual learning setting. So it's been just kind of mutually beneficial. Of course, there are, you know, continue to be just so many challenges, but some best practices are definitely bubbling up to the top.
Great. And speaking of best practices, Laura, I know this the issue of student teaching is very much in your professional interest, your research interest, and so I wanted to ask you about how student teaching is going right now. It's one of the most important components, of course, of undergraduate pre-service teacher education. How are students completing those requirements these days, and what have been their experiences so far this semester or even at the end of the semester?
That's a really good question. Well, I guess, you know, one of the two positives I would say, maybe three. One is that every student teacher right now knows how to teach remotely, which is going to just benefit them when there is face-to-face instruction, because most of these tools, like Roberto mentioned, Flipgrid, you know, whether it's Nearpod, Padlet, any of these tools, teachers sort of like self-selected before, I think, how interested they were. Faculty kind of is opted in or out, and now there's just no opting out. Everyone. Faculty has to get with it. Student teachers are getting with it, and I think that's going to make them very powerful when they are able to go back to school. The second piece is that gap that's always existed between school districts and teacher ed programs. Although there's so many great examples of professional development schools, strong clinical partnerships between universities and schools, there's still very much a problem of a disconnect between teacher ed and what teachers are experiencing on the ground. So just as an example, for our student teachers in CUNY, which is the City University of New York, which is, there are a lot of student teachers across all the CUNY campuses, the New York City public schools created passwords for them so they could actually access the Google Meets and be part of the student teaching, because otherwise how would they actually participate in remote teaching? And you can imagine the challenges around setting that up. But I think it helps districts to realize that, yes, you can say, oh, we're all theory and we don't want to have anything to do with teacher ed, but we have a pipeline issue, like Roberto said. So school districts need to work with institutions of higher ed. So it kind of goes both ways, because the third piece is that student teachers in a lot of cases have a little more time. They're getting a grade for it, and perhaps they are more current with technologies, so they can be really helpful to classroom teachers. So I've had teachers that are partner teachers for us calling us saying, can we have a 100-student teacher because I need help here. This is so overwhelming. And we, as we really promote multilingual college students to come into the profession of teaching, they have tremendous linguistic resources to provide schools. So there is a lot of symbiosis, I think, that can happen. And we don't have the issue of sometimes the challenges, at least where I am, for student teachers commuting, working, living. In a way, being home gives them a chance to focus on the student teaching, follow up with students, et cetera. But it has been quite a lift to get all of those student teachers into the classrooms. And this fall, I think we're going to learn a lot so that we can be in better shape. I just want to mention one more thing that's sometimes not talked about, which is student teaching is generally the culminating experience of a teacher preparation program. But because field work is such a big part of all clinically rich teacher ed programs, like, for example, in New York State, teachers have to do 200 hours of field work prior to student teaching. So that's incorporated into other courses. So those have been really challenging, and we have always used a lot of video to do simulations, to do analysis, but we still need to have live interaction. So, for example, tutoring programs. ESL students a lot of times get free tutoring, and after-school programs, community-based programs, public libraries are huge places, great spaces. So we can connect a lot of our teacher ed students to these community-based organizations in ways we never could before, and provide English learners great additional tutoring services to compensate for the lack of teaching during the day, and strengthen those relationships between higher ed and nonprofit and community-based organizations.
Great. We've gotten a number of really great questions in the Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to those. If folks who still have questions in their mind, if you haven't added them into the Q&A, go ahead and do that. But let me go ahead and address a few of these. There were a couple of clarification questions. First one for Laura and then one for Diane. Laura, what's the name of the program in New York that's a Grow Your Own Teachers for minority students?
I think Roberto's talking about Relay. Is that the one you're referencing, Roberto?
Sorry.
Relay, New York City Teaching Fellows?
Yeah, the New York City Teaching Fellows, was one that I was referencing. There's so many programs. I mean, Chicago, Boston both have great programs. And, I just want to applaud you, Laura, because for your leadership and for mentioning the professional development schools model, which is in our traditional colleges of education, and is really about how do we deepen the connection and the preparation of our teacher candidates through that connection through a close connection between higher education and our school districts. and make sure that, our teachers have a depth of preparation and induction and mentorship, and that symbiotic relationship also between our candidates and veteran teachers in that experience is really just so rich. So those are the types of models that we should be thinking about pushing forward and hopefully we can hold on to that depth of connection and partnership on the other side of this pandemic and grow that, because those are the types of arrangements and preparation experiences that keep our teachers as assets to their students' learning on the other end.
I just want to also throw in, if that person's interested, is New York City Teach. That's a great program that focuses on supporting men of color into the teaching profession. Actually, they have a webinar tomorrow. I'll try to send it in the chat to you. And I know a lot of the males of color who've gone through our program. They tend to be, of course, in the minority. Like Diane said, mostly females. Those programs have given them mentors who are educators, and that's really helped them, persist and stay in the profession.
Laura, I think the name of that group, you went out just for the important word. Can you say the name of the group again?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's New York City Men Teach.
Okay.
I'll send it to Lisa to post.
Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure. I don't know if that was just me, but the key word in that sentence was the one I didn't hear. Another clarification, Diane, what's the name of the book that was used in the study of culturally relevant teaching that you did with the 500 teachers?
Yeah, I actually misspoke. I said it was a book study, but it was an online course. But my co-author, Sydney Snyder, and myself we are coming out with a new culturally responsive teaching book that should be out through Corwin this January or February. So it's called, we have a work in progress. It's basically will be culturally responsive teaching for multilingual learners, tools for equity.
Excellent. Super exciting. I can't wait to read that. Let's see. Diane, let me actually just stick with you for a minute. What are a couple key understandings or skills that new teachers of multilingual students should know and be able to do? This person speaking from a teacher ed program here in Massachusetts, and I think this is, as we've been discussing that the dynamic of going online has caused people to rethink and shift. There may be some teachers out there who have had English learners but haven't really thought before now about what the supports are. So for newer teachers or teachers who are newer to English learners, what are sort of the top things that you are trying to get across to them or that you would hope that they would start to think about?
Right. And we really have to, kind of whittle it down and narrow it down. When you're a new teacher, it's so overwhelming, right? There are so many things to focus on. So if I had to name like a top three I would name being able to advocate for students and also for yourselves, and developing your own voice as an advocate. How do you fit into your school? How do you collaborate? How do you kind of push a little bit when needed in just the right way to get what is right for your students and also for yourself? So I would think of advocacy. Also, a top skill or understanding to come armed with is collaboration. And how do you collaborate with general ed teachers and also your administrators, and figuring out your role in that process so you're not just seen as an aide or where you're seen as someone offering great expertise in language and content and culture as well. And the third area I would recommend would be in terms of providing supports and scaffolds for students at different levels of proficiency. So that's a skill that is absolutely essential. And then the advocacy and collaboration are kind of woven through all of that. Once you have these tools in your toolbox and the research, how do you advocate and how do you collaborate with others to ensure that general education teachers are also using these strategies that are effective with English learners? So I would focus on those three first as key skills and understandings and expand from there.
Julie, if I could just one thing that I need to say, I'm burning in my chair. So those three things, 100%, but they have to be on a strong foundation of understanding language acquisition and a heteroglossic stance. So we need educators who value multilingualism, of course, embody it, and they need to understand how not just to scaffold content, but understand the language demands of the content areas and teach English and native language wherever possible, so that students can be successful in school. Because I think when ESL bilingual educators are experts in language, schools will listen to them. If they don't perceive them as having more than just some nice strategies, we take the soul really out of our profession. So we must stay as professionals, as experts in the development of language. And when we can really serve, like Diane said, our content area colleagues by identifying language demands and supporting those through our English language development work, our value is seen. So I think I just need to say that.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback and absolutely support that as well, and it goes hand in hand with then elevating the role, right, of the ESL or the EL teacher. Once you have that expertise in, recognizing and teaching to language demands and pulling that out and having the linguistic expertise, that serves a great purpose to elevate your role. And so others see you as having this vast knowledge to bring to the table. Absolutely.
If I could just jump in on that, Julie, say, Laura and Diane bring deep expertise in the pre-service and in-service work here in terms of developing our teachers to that end. But I just want to punctuate how important that is, because that we also think about policies that reflect and affirm that preparation for our teachers of our emergent bilinguals and our English learners. And again, I feel like we've gotten to a point as a country where we are substituting a lot of English language arts curriculum and PD for the more specialized support that we need around understanding the pedagogy of second language acquisition and linguistic development at large. And we have to get back to more opportunities to prepare our teachers more deeply toward that end before they even leave their clinical prep, as well as greater opportunities, as Diane mentions, to be able to meet that need for the folks that are already in the profession. And so, the resources and the prioritization of that in the context of teacher prep is something that every state Department of Education can look at and can get more serious about. And at the federal level, where we can think about how do we really recover and reestablish the teaching and learning of our emergent bilinguals as a national priority, given how large a population we have in our public education system. I'm hopeful of that as an outcome, and I'm also hopeful about the wonderful advocacy and voice that our educators of our English learners can bring to this work, as has been discussed. When we move that voice beyond the four walls of a classroom, and our educators join our community activists and join our families to stand up for the rights and the needs of our immigrant families and our English language and emergent bilingual families, that's such a powerful thing. We've studied this a lot here at Teach Plus. We know how important that voice is and how trusted that voice of educators is for families and for the public. And so we also need to encourage that level of advocacy across our communities.
That is an excellent segue to another set of questions we've gotten in. A few people are writing in with questions about teachers working with families, and then a few others are talking about working with non-governmental organizations, with community-based organizations. And so, I wonder if any of you, I'll just let whoever wants to go first speak to this question of how can we help teachers understand how to, move beyond the four walls, as you just said, Roberto, to talk to work as partners with families, communities, with NGOs, with all of the other stakeholders. I'm not sure who wants to take that on first. Roberto.
Well, I would just, a word of encouragement to all of our advocates and community leaders that are joining today to think about explicit ways to encourage and create those bridges to educators, to make room for them in that level of advocacy and work, right? Because I think there's a condition that we have in our profession, unfortunately, and a norm in many of our schools that does, as teachers are teaching one cohort of students every day in, day out, that does not encourage collaboration or that voice across beyond those four walls. So we need I find a lot of our educators need that invitation. And when they're able to use and exercise that voice, it unlocks a whole opportunity to really think about advocacy and policy and systems change in new ways. So I think we can begin there. And I would say there's a lot of, our educators really are seeing the needs of their students. They experience those every day. They're connecting and building those relationships every day with families now across the course of this pandemic. We have teachers that are hosting Sunday night sessions with their parents so that they have a sense of what they're going to cover in remote learning over the course of the week. That's been a really great practice to just help parents get more involved and engaged. I'm hearing of teachers who are reporting that parents are showing up, and even if that's not an environment that they've been in before, they're showing up and are ready to be prepared to support their kids' education. So I think we need to capitalize on that.
Great. And Diane, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I would also add just kind of along those same lines of, inviting them, like Roberto said, like having the, members of the community invite teachers. As, when I think back to my own teacher education program, I just didn't know what was out there. So bringing them in also as guest speakers in classes and sharing, what resources are out there, what are some ways we can connect. I would love to see, and this has happened in where I earned my own PhD, we had policymakers come in, community members come in and speak to us in our seminars. And it was just a really powerful way to know what's beyond my classroom walls and how can I connect with others that are so eager to connect with me. So that I would recommend that practice as well.
I would just add on that I think because of the removal of a lot of silo walls that we've been living in, there is a lot of opportunity for more interconnectivity with families. So obviously the most clear one is need for translation. We know we have federal legislation. We have state legislation. I live in Long Island and in a community that I will not name that has not translated almost anything that's gone out to families during this crisis. And the amount of parent communication has 100% increased. I mean, you almost daily now get something from your superintendent about a COVID case or something happening. It's not translated. There are mandatory public meetings for families, right, about reopening. And yet there's no live interpreters. So what I've seen is a real opportunity for people in communities. In this community that I live, there are teachers who live here who teach English learners not in this community who are recognizing the problem. There are people who are advocates who work with immigrant families. There are people who, let's say, work at the public library, like I mentioned before, who do a lot of ESL tutoring. We found these people kind of coalescing now to put pressure on the school for interpretation and translation. And tonight is a financial aid night. For the first time ever in our district, it's going to have a live interpreter in Spanish. And I think it's only because of the pandemic and because all of us are coming together. And it's easier for us to alert each other and to work together because you don't have to show up for a meeting that no one can show up to who works, because these school districts hold meetings at 10 a.m. for I don't know who. So this is a really awesome time to say there's no time barrier, et cetera. But I think the family engagement piece just obviously starts with linguistic access. And there are so many tools, and we see a lot of schools using, whether it's talking points or et cetera, that can really break down some of those barriers. And that's, I think, why, like Roberto mentioned, we're seeing so many more families showing up. We held a session on how to help your child navigate the Google Classroom. We ran it in Spanish. We broke the internet. I mean, there were 1,000 parents trying to come in, and we didn't have enough space on the webinar for them. So again, it's debunking the myth that these parents are not interested. We can see it's because there are these barriers of showing up at a time when they're working and that it's all in English. So I think that's a real good opportunity that we can see going forward.
We are just at the top of the hour, but I want to just quickly go through one more round and ask each of you, given everything we've talked about today, what would be your top 1 or 2 policy recommendations at the federal, state, or local level? And if you can be specific, that would be extra helpful. And maybe we'll go Roberto and then Diane, and then I'll give Laura the last word.
Yeah, well, there's so many to think of here, but I would say prioritizing greater opportunities for teacher preparation, pre-service, to build our pipeline of deeply prepared and committed teachers of our emergent bilingual and English learners is really important, right? And so I'd love to see greater investment, scholarships, opportunities for more grow your own programs and for a deeper level of clinical preparation, just as Laura described there. I also think, if I could wave my magic wand to be able to provide that opportunity for in-service for the level of mentoring that our early career teachers need and for the depth of knowledge and skill development around second language acquisition for all of our teachers, right? A level of knowledge and depth that all of our teachers can benefit from, because English learners, we used to be in a state where there were certain concentrations. That's certainly still the case in concentrations in certain states and urban areas. But we have our English learner families and our immigrant families really dispersed across the country, and in so many systems and in so many schools. Those are still invisible parents, invisible populations that don't have voice or the political currency to be able to get the resources they need. So we need to be equipping our schools to really meet those needs, regardless of where they emerge.
Right. Diane?
Sure, I'll keep it quick. If I had to name my top recommendation, it would be, just based on the findings of our recertification study, that all states should require high-quality professional development to be recertified for all teachers. And within that, I would also recommend that professional development offer flexibility for teachers. Like Laura mentioned, they broke the internet, and providing support to families in a flexible way that honors their families and their work commitments and their language. And the same should be true for teachers. We should offer professional development that you can choose, where you have a choice how to do it, where to do it, and in what mode. So that's my top recommendation.
I only get to do 2, Julie? I don't know. All right, 2. One is that everyone who becomes licensed to be a school leader, building leader, district leader, must have at least one course on the instruction of English language learners, and that as part of their internship as leaders, they must coach in a dual language bilingual or ESL program. Because the teachers can only go so far when building leaders are not knowledgeable or resistant or xenophobic, etc. The second one, I guess I would say, is that we have some form of an IEP for English learners, some kind of legal document that requires the school to give English language development and, anywhere possible, native language development to every student, because it doesn't really happen for our students. And our parents are not in the position, many of them undocumented, to advocate in schools for what is obviously very, very important for the academic growth and well-being of their children. Done.
Great, thank you, Laura. Yeah, those are excellent examples. They all were, and I think that this, this final round has really brought again to light the idea that the pandemic and what's happening in schools, as difficult as it is really allowing us to talk about some I was going to say innovative solutions, but they're things. A lot of them are things we've been talking about for a long time, but really trying to push those forward and make sure that these changes, policy changes can be made for the future. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm sorry if we didn't get to any of your questions. We can try to follow up with you if we can. For those we didn't get to. Again, the couple of the brief and the commentary that I mentioned before on your screen, which you can view on the Migration Policy Institute website. Please stay in touch if you have any other concerns or want to engage in this conversation. I think this is, as I said before, the start of a conversation about policy and about what we can do to improve education for English learners moving forward. So we're really looking forward to engaging with you again more in the future. Thank you, everyone, so much.